Imagine this. You're in a cafe. Maybe you leave your laptop for a second to grab your coffee. Or you lend a friend some money, just on their word. It happens all the time, right?
Yeah, it really highlights how much we rely on trust, often without even thinking about it.
But then think about the opposite, constantly doubting everyone, feeling you have to watch your back. That really shows the value of, well, earned trust. It's not just given.
Exactly. And that's what we're really digging into today. Earned trust.
Yeah.
It's complicated. We're looking at it through sociology, psychology, philosophy, even biology and evolution.
And crucially, how this all connects, or maybe doesn't connect, to artificial intelligence.
Yeah.
Which is, everywhere now.
Right. We've pulled together some really diverse sources on this.
So the mission for you today is basically to get the core insights. How is trust actually built? How does it work? How does it break? And what changes when AI enters the picture? We want to give you that shortcut to understanding this really essential idea.
Okay, let's start unpacking it. Where should we begin? Maybe with the different disciplinary views.
Sounds good. Let's start with the big picture sociology. How do sociologists see trust?
Well, from a sociological lens, trust isn't just a personal feeling. It's seen as a property of society itself, fundamental. One source literally said, without it, you'd have chaos and paralyzing fear.
Wow. Okay, so it's like the glue holding things together.
Pretty much. It's described as this underlying faithfulness in social relationships. It's what allows us to interact without constant suspicion.
And I found that idea from Luhmann really compelling, how trust reduces the monstrous complexity of life. Like, you can't possibly predict everything everyone will do.
Exactly. You'd be totally overwhelmed. Trust lets us act as if certain negative things won't happen. It's a huge cognitive shortcut. It makes society more efficient, more adaptable.
So it saves us mental energy, basically.
Right. And sociologists often distinguish between generalized trusting people in general, strangers even, and particularized trust, which is more for specific people or groups you know. That generalized trust is super important for modern complex societies.
Okay, that makes sense. So shifting to psychology, it becomes more internal, right? A judgment call.
Yes, psychologically, it's often framed as an internal judgment based on what we perceive as good reasons.
Yeah.
It requires some familiarity, somewhere between knowing absolutely everything and knowing absolutely nothing.
Because if you knew everything, you wouldn't need trust.
Precisely. And a core psychological element is the willingness to be vulnerable. You're making yourself susceptible to someone else's actions, but with a positive expectation.
That vulnerability piece seems key. It implies risk.
It absolutely does, and you can't separate it from emotion. Trust often involves affective bonds, feelings, which is why, betrayal feels so intensely personal and outrageous. It's not just a calculated risk gone wrong.
And this starts really early, doesn't it? Like infancy.
Right. Erickson's stages. That first stage, trust versus mistrust, is foundational. How caregivers respond consistently, reliably shapes our basic capacity to trust later on. It builds hope.
So our earliest experiences really set a template.
They do. And there's an interesting point about learning, too. Psychologically, extending trust, even if you get burned sometimes, gives you information. You learn.
Okay.
But if you always withhold trust, you don't get that feedback. You don't learn who's trustworthy.
Yeah.
So sometimes the trust first, then verify approach is actually more adaptive for navigating the social world.
Huh. So it's not just naive, it's a way of gathering data. Okay, now what about the philosophical take?
They seem to really zero in on the difference between trust and just relying on something.
That's a big one for them, yes. You rely on your chair to hold you, but you don't trust it in the same way you trust a person. The key difference often comes down to the reaction when it fails.
Right, disappointment versus betrayal.
Exactly. Betrayal implies a moral dimension, a sense that the person should have acted differently for the right reasons. Mere reliance failing doesn't usually carry that same moral weight.
So philosophers are interested in those right reasons.
Yes, and they distinguish between practical trust, trusting someone do something, and epistemic trust, trusting someone's word or knowledge. And there's a debate about whether trust needs to be fully rationalized. Like, do you need proof first?
Yeah, that's the reductionism versus anti-reductionism thing. Reductionists argue you need independent evidence, good reasons, to justify trust. Anti-reductionists suggest trust can be rational, even without specific evidence, maybe just in the absence of reasons to distrust.
Okay.
And ethically, it gets complex. We generally agree people should be trustworthy, but is there an ethical obligation to trust others? That's more contentious. But the key ethical point is that asymmetry, betrayal, is seen as a moral breach, exploiting vulnerability beyond just a failure to deliver.
Got it. So putting it all together, when we talk about earned trust, we're really focusing on how it develops through interaction, right? Not just a default setting or reputation.
Precisely. It's dynamic, it's learned, it evolves based on direct experience. That feedback loop of vulnerability and verification is the core mechanism.
You put yourself out there a bit, see what happens, adjust your trust level.
Exactly. And consistently showing three key things seems crucial. Ability, can they do what's needed? Benevolence, do they have goodwill towards you? And integrity, do they stick to acceptable principles? Demonstrating those consistently is how you build that solid, earned trust.
Ability, benevolence, integrity.
Okay. That really clarifies the earned part. Now, this might sound a bit strange, but what about the biology? Is trust somehow wired into us?
Well, it's not quite that simple, but yes, there's definitely a biological component. Research points strongly towards hormones like oxytocin and vasopressin playing roles in social bonding and behaviors related to trust.
Oxytocin, the love hormone or trust hormone. I've heard that.
Yeah, it gets called that. Studies involving like nasal sprays of oxytocin have suggested it can increase trusting behavior, maybe by dampening fear responses in the brain. But it's more nuanced.
How so? Well, the effects aren't always consistent across studies, and it might depend on the person and the situation. It might influence general attitudes towards trust more than specific actions, especially for people who are less trusting to begin with. And context matters. Sometimes it might even increase favoritism towards your own group.
Okay, so it's not a magic trust potion.
Definitely not. And genetics play a part too. Variations in the genes for the receptors for oxytocin and vasopressin are linked to individual differences in how trusting people tend to be.
So it's partly inherited.
Twin studies suggest so, yeah. Maybe around 10–20% for trusting behavior and even higher, over 30% for trusting attitudes. But it's crucial to remember, biology provides a sort of baseline or potential.
But our experiences in psychology shape how it actually plays out.
Exactly. It's an interaction. Biology provides the foundation, but psychology and environment modulate its expression.
Okay. And from an evolutionary perspective, trust must have been hugely important for us, right, as social animals.
Oh, absolutely fundamental. It's seen as a critical adaptation for cooperation, for building complex societies. Without trust, large-scale cooperation is just incredibly difficult.
It helps manage the uncertainty of dealing with others.
Precisely. It lets us take calculated risks in social exchanges, which ultimately leads to better collective outcomes. Evolutionary game theory shows how, even though trusting makes you vulnerable, strategies involving trust and cooperation can actually emerge and become stable over time, especially when interactions are repeated.
Like in that evolution of trust game.
Yeah, exactly like that. It demonstrates how cooperation can arise from simple rules of interaction. And frameworks like TPOCO emphasize trust for teamwork, reputation building, sharing resources, all vital for group success.
So as societies got bigger and more complex than just small family groups,
More sophisticated ways of establishing and maintaining trust likely had to co-evolve alongside that complexity. It allowed cooperation beyond just kin.
it really seems to scale up. And looping back to development, Erickson's stages show this isn't just about evolution or biology, but a lifelong journey shaped by our actual experiences.
Right. That first stage in infancy is foundational, setting the stage with hope if caregivers are responsive. But subsequent stages developing autonomy, initiative, intimacy, they all involve navigating trust in different ways.
So early trust helps you succeed later on.
It acts like a scaffold, yes. While negative early experiences can make trust harder, it's not necessarily deterministic. People can learn to trust or relearn trust later in life, although those early patterns often have a lasting influence.
Okay, so humans have this incredibly rich, layered understanding of trust: cognitive, emotional, learned, historical, biological. Now, how does this compare to AI? Can AI even understand trust in this way?
Well, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? The short answer is no, not in the same way. AI's approach is fundamentally different. It's computational, functional. It doesn't feel trust or vulnerability.
So it simulates it rather than experiences it.
Exactly. AI can be programmed to behave trustworthily. It can demonstrate reliability, follow ethical rules we give it, even interact in ways that seem helpful or user-focused.
So it can mimic those factors we talked about: ability, benevolence, integrity.
It can emulate them, yes. Ability is its performance, its accuracy. Benevolence might be reflected in user interface design or helpful responses. Integrity comes down to its programming, fairness, lack of bias, transparency, security.
But it's programmed integrity, not internally motivated integrity.
Precisely. There's often what some call a benevolence-integrity gap. AI can be designed to act benevolently or with integrity, but it lacks genuine intention, emotion, or moral reasoning behind those actions. And users often sense that difference, consciously or unconsciously.
What about trust between species? Does my dog earn my trust like a person does, or is that anthropomorphism?
It's mostly anthropomorphism, yeah.
Yeah.
Animals definitely learn based on experience with humans. Your dog learns you're a source of food and safety and behaves accordingly. That's powerful associative learning and conditioning.
So it's learned association, not a deep understanding of my intentions or character.
Right. There are examples of mutualism, like those honey-guide birds leading people to honey, which involves learned signaling. But attributing human-like earned trust is probably stretching it. It's more about predictable rewards and lack of threat. And trying to force trust, like feeding wild animals, is usually harmful.
Yeah, okay, good distinction. Back to humans, then, that element of time, of shared history, seems absolutely critical for the trust we build with each other.
Crucial. Earned trust isn't instantaneous. It's built incrementally through repeated interactions. Consistency matters hugely. One betrayal can undo years of trustworthy behavior because it violates that history.
And that applies on a societal level, too, right? Trust in institutions depends on their track record.
Absolutely. Collective experiences shape societal trust. And individual lived experiences, especially early ones, as Erickson highlighted, lay the foundation for our capacity to trust. There is a path to dependency. Past experiences influence present judgments. Rebuilding broken trust is slow and difficult. It requires substantial evidence over time to counteract the negative history.
So AI, lacking that history and lived experience, approaches trust very differently. How do its computational models work then?
They're essentially predictive tools. They gather data, trust evidence from interactions, reputation systems, maybe even user feedback, and perform trust computations. The goal is usually functional, to make systems more reliable, predictable, and cooperative in digital spaces.
So it's calculating a probability of trustworthiness, essentially.
In a way, yes. It's assessing the likelihood that the system, or another agent, will perform as expected or desired based on available data. It's about optimizing function, not experiencing vulnerability or ethical obligation in the human sense.
And there are still big challenges for AI in even simulating trust effectively, right? Like the black box problem.
Huge challenge. If we can't understand why an AI made a certain decision, it's very hard to truly trust it, especially in high-stakes situations. Opacity hinders verification.
And predictability can be an issue, too.
Yes. While AI can be consistent, it can also behave unpredictably when faced with situations outside its training data. That unpredictability erodes trust quickly. And fundamentally, AI lacks that genuine emotional connection. It can mimic empathy, but it doesn't feel it.
Could that lead to that uncanny valley feeling, where it's almost human but something's off?
Definitely. If the simulation feels inauthentic or manipulative, it can backfire and decrease trust rather than build it. Authenticity, or at least perceived authenticity and transparency about its nature, seems really important.
But despite all that, we are seeing large language models like GPT-4 show surprisingly human-like patterns in things like the trust game.
It's fascinating research, yeah. LLMs can simulate human behavior in these structured scenarios quite well. It shows they've learned complex patterns related to cooperation and reciprocity from their training data.
So they can act as if they trust or are trustworthy in the game.
Right. But we have to be really careful not to equate that simulated behavior with genuine human trust, which involves that whole complex web of vulnerability, emotion, ethics, and lived experience. The LLM is likely pattern matching, not understanding trust in a human way. We need realistic expectations.
That distinction is critical. Okay, let's pivot to the impact. When earned trust exists, or when it's missing, what are the effects, starting with us as individuals?
The impact is profound. Emotionally, trust is linked to feelings of safety, security, joy, hope. Its absence or betrayal breeds fear, anxiety, despair. Trust in oneself is often seen as a prerequisite for trusting others. It helps regulate our emotions.
And it connects to really basic needs like Maslow's hierarchy.
Absolutely. Trust contributes to feelings of safety and belonging, those foundational levels. Without them, it's hard to move towards esteem or self-actualization. Secure attachments built on trust foster resilience. Conversely, low societal trust is correlated with higher rates of mental health issues.
Wow, and it even affects physical health.
The evidence suggests so. Things like poor sleep quality, higher stress levels, especially workplace trust issues, and even lower self-reported general health have been linked to low levels of trust. There seems to be a real psychosomatic connection. Chronic distrust might impact stress hormones, sleep, maybe even immune function.
That's remarkable. Now, scaling up, what about our relationships in society?
Trust is the absolute foundation. Healthy relationships, romantic, family, friends, work, education, they all require trust to function. It allows for vulnerability, authenticity, effective communication, conflict resolution.
Without it, relationships are just fragile, unstable.
Exactly. Earned trust provides the resilience to weather difficulties. It's built through reliability, honesty, empathy, follow through all those consistent behaviors.
And society-wide, trust becomes social capital.
Yes, it's a core component of social capital.
Yeah.
The networks, norms, and trustworthiness that facilitate cooperation. It's the social glue. High-trust societies generally see more civic participation, better governance, greater well-being.
And low trust leads to
Fragmentation, cynicism, difficulty tackling collective problems. It creates negative feedback loops where distrust breeds more distrust, undermining social cohesion.
the economic implications must be huge, too.
Definitely. Trust greases the wheels of the economy. It lowers transaction costs. You don't need elaborate contracts for everything. It encourages investment, innovation, entrepreneurship, because people feel safer taking risks and collaborating.
Whereas low trust means more friction, maybe corruption.
Exactly. Things like rent-seeking, corruption become more likely. Inequality also tends to erode societal trust. High trust acts like an invisible economic asset.
And it seems trust isn't evenly spread. Our social position, background experiences all play a role.
They do. Research shows complexities. Sometimes higher trust is extended to lower income groups based on perceived morality, yet those same groups might report lower generalized trust themselves, often linked to experiences of inequality or discrimination. Historical factors deeply influence trust levels between different racial or ethnic groups. So trust both reflects and can reinforce social stratification.
It's woven into the very fabric of how society is structured. Okay, let's turn to the ethical side. There's clearly a moral weight here.
Huge moral weight. That distinction between disappointment and betrayal really highlights it. Trust involves vulnerability, and the trustee has a moral responsibility not to exploit that. Betrayal isn't just failing a task, it's a violation of that implicit moral agreement.
And the impact of betrayal can be really damaging psychologically.
Absolutely. It can impair someone's ability to trust in the future, lead to what's called moral injury. Shattered core beliefs about fairness and safety. Legal systems even recognize this, with penalties for fraud or breach of public trust.
So why do people exploit trust? Is it just bad actors, or are there bigger forces?
It's often a mix. Psychologically, things like greed, low empathy, or maybe even low self-trust can play a role. Sociologically, power imbalances are huge. They can create opportunities and even incentives for exploitation. A breakdown in social norms, what Durkheim called anomie or just a climate of pervasive distrust, can also make exploitation seem more acceptable or likely.
Deception is often the tool used.
Yes. Though, interestingly, some pro-social lies are sometimes perceived as increasing benevolence-based trust, paradoxically. But generalized deception clearly erodes trust overall. And lack of trust in oneself or others is also linked to riskier behaviors. So it can be individual motivations, but also systemic conditions.
And you mentioned earlier that culture shapes this too.
Definitely. What counts as trustworthy behavior, what constitutes betrayal, how trust is built, it all varies culturally. Individualistic cultures might focus more on demonstrated ability, while collectivistic cultures might emphasize relational history and benevolence more. Even simple actions can be interpreted differently. Cultural sensitivity is absolutely key for building trust across different groups.
Okay, now thinking about trust and our mindset, how does it shape our beliefs, our whole view of reality?
Profoundly. A huge amount of what we know isn't from direct experience, but from trusting sources, experts, teachers, news media, cultural narratives. That's epistemic trust. Our entire worldview is largely built on this foundation of trusted information.
So if that trust is challenged, our whole reality can feel shaken.
Exactly. Think about challenges to trust in science or institutions. It forces a reevaluation of fundamental beliefs. Even our beliefs about whether people can change impacts trust recovery after a violation. Political ideologies are deeply intertwined with trust in government and other groups. Declining trust fuels polarization. Trust is like the scaffolding upon which we build our understanding of the world.
Does it connect even to existential questions? Dealing with uncertainty, finding meaning?
It seems to. Trust is vital in therapy for exploring deep anxieties. A basic trust in life, or in oneself, or in one's community, helps navigate the inherent uncertainties of existence. Some philosophies emphasize accepting or trusting the natural limits of life to find peace. Finding meaning often involves trusting in something beyond oneself, whether it's relationships, values, or even a higher power for some. This existential trust can be a buffer against anxiety.
And maybe surprisingly, there's even a link to formal systems like logic and math. How does that work?
It's about complexity reduction, similar to Luhmann's idea in sociology. In logic and math, we start with axioms, fundamental assumptions we don't prove but accept as true. We have to trust these axioms and the rules of inference to build any complex system of knowledge.
Ah, like an axiomatic trust.
Exactly. Without that foundational trust in the rules of the game, the entire structure collapses. Even in physics, understanding relies on trusting the mathematical formalisms and the underlying principles. It's a different kind of trust, obviously, but it serves a similar function of enabling progress by accepting certain starting points.
That's fascinating. Okay, bringing it back to AI one last time. How can AI help us understand human trust better, and how can AI itself become more trustworthy?
Well, AI machine learning modeling can be a powerful tool for studying trust. Simulating trust dynamics, analyzing vast data sets for patterns, identifying biases we might not notice, like those LLMs in trust games giving us insights.
But always with the caveat that it's simulation, not genuine understanding.
Crucial caveat. AI can also reflect back our own biases, learn from the data, so it can be a mirror. But for AI itself to earn our trust, several things are key.
Like transparency.
Yes, explainable AI, XAI, making its reasoning understandable. Accountability, clear processes for when things go wrong. Fairness and bias mitigation, actively designing systems to be equitable.
And reliability, of course.
Non-negotiable. Consistent performance, robustness. Some are working on embedding ethical rules directly, like constitutional AI. And clear communication with users is vital, managing expectations, explaining limitations.
So the goal isn't blind trust in AI.
No, absolutely not. It's about achieving calibrated trust. Understanding where AI excels, where it falls short, and when it's appropriate to rely on it, based on evidence of its actual capabilities and safeguards.
This has been incredibly thorough. It really drives home how foundational earned trust is.
It really is. It touches everything, our psychology, our relationships, society, ethics.
Yeah.
And while AI can mimic parts of it, that deep human experience of trust, rooted in vulnerability and shared history, remains unique.
So maybe the final thought for everyone listening is this. As AI gets better and better at simulating trustworthiness, how will that change our own human understanding of trust? Will we start to blur the lines?
That's the big question, isn't it? What happens if we start confusing the simulation with the real thing? It's something we really need to think about carefully as we move forward.
Definitely food for thought. Consider your own experiences. Where does trust play the biggest role in your life? And how might these ideas change how you see interactions, both human and increasingly digital?
It's a vital conversation to keep having.
This is DigitView.